Hey, everyone. I never thought I'd be the guy posting here, but life has a funny way of kicking you when you're least expecting it. I've been married to Megan for 8 years. She's smart, charming, and knows how to light up a room. At least, that's how I saw her until about 2 weeks ago when everything started to unravel. It began with something small, something stupid, even a watch. It was a Thursday morning, and I was getting ready for work. Megan had left early to run errands, so I had the house to myself. As I grabbed my wallet off the dresser, I saw it sitting there, a sleek, black leather-banded watch that definitely wasn't mine. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand. Heavy, expensive-looking, masculine. Now, Megan and I don't have kids, and we're not the type to host overnight guests. So, unless I had a bout of sleepwalking and went shopping for luxury watches in my dreams, there was no explanation that made sense. When Megan got home that afternoon, I casually brought it up. "Hey, babe, did you leave this watch in the bedroom?" I asked, holding it up. Her reaction? Textbook smooth. She glanced at it like it was nothing, barely missing a beat before saying, "Oh, that must be Helen's. She came over for coffee yesterday while you were at work." Now, Helen is one of Megan's friends, flighty, bubbly, and perpetually single. But here's the thing. Helen's style leans heavily toward boho chic. Lots of bangles, colorful scarves, and flowy skirts. This watch? It screamed Wall Street banker, not free-spirited yoga enthusiast. I don't know why I let it slide, but I did. I mean, it's just a watch, right? Except, deep down, I knew something was off. Megan's explanation didn't fit, and she knew it. The way her voice had a slight edge, like she was daring me to question her, made my stomach churn. I decided not to press her on it, at least, not yet. But that watch stayed on my mind for the rest of the day, gnawing at me like a splinter I couldn't dig out. The watch was the beginning, but the texts are what blew the whole thing wide open. 2 days after the watch incident, Megan and I were having a quiet evening at home. She was on the couch scrolling through her laptop, and I was on my phone, mindlessly going through emails. Out of nowhere, Megan got up and went to the kitchen, leaving her phone on the coffee table. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about it, but something about her sudden exit felt off. I glanced at her phone. I'm not proud of what I did next, but the truth is, curiosity, and maybe a bit of suspicion, got the better of me. I picked it up, thumb hovering over the screen. The notifications were lit up, and there it was, a message from an unknown number. My stomach dropped when I read it. "Thanks for the coffee, and for last night. Can't wait to see you again." I froze, my brain scrambling to come up with a reasonable explanation. Maybe it was a misunderstanding, a joke from one of her girlfriends. But then another text came through, from the same number. "Let me know when he's out so we can plan." Megan walked back in a moment later, humming a tune like everything was fine. I put her phone down and turned to her. "Hey, who's been texting you? Your phone's blowing up." She stopped in her tracks, her face unreadable for a split second before she flashed a casual smile. "Oh, it's just Derek from work. He's always flirting with everyone. You know how some guys are." Derek? I'd heard her mention him before. Some guy in her department who she swore was all talk and no action. But why would Derek be texting her like that? "You sure about that?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. Megan rolled her eyes. "Yes, Eric. He's harmless. He flirts to get a reaction, and that's it. Trust me, it's nothing." But her body language told a different story. She was shifting her weight from one foot to the other, avoiding eye contact. I didn't press further, but I wasn't convinced. Later that night, Megan went to bed early, claiming she was tired. I stayed up, replaying the messages in my mind. My gut told me there was more to this, but I needed proof before I confronted her. Little did I know, the proof would come sooner than I expected, and it would be impossible to ignore. The next night, Megan was in the shower, and I was lounging on the couch trying to focus on a movie, but my mind kept drifting back to those texts. Her excuse about Derek didn't sit right with me. My gut screamed that something was wrong, but I kept telling myself I was being paranoid. That's when I noticed her laptop on the coffee table. Open. Unlocked. Now, Megan is usually pretty protective of her devices. She's the type who logs out of everything when she's done, even if she's just going to the kitchen for 5 minutes. But tonight, she'd slipped up. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to pretend everything was fine. But the other part, the part that couldn't shake the image of those texts, knew I had to look. I opened her email. At first, it seemed normal, work messages, a couple of spam emails. But then I saw a folder labeled Personal. Click. And there it was. Photos. Explicit photos. Of Megan. I froze, my stomach twisting in knots. She'd sent them to someone. The email threads were there, plain as day. Each one had a different subject line, but they all told the same story. Miss you. Can't wait for tomorrow. Last night was amazing. The email addresses were anonymized, but I didn't need to know who they belonged to. The content spoke for itself. She'd been sending these pictures and messages for months. My hand shook as I grabbed my phone and took photos of the screen. Every single email, every damning message. If Megan was going to lie to my face, she wasn't going to be able to wiggle out of this. I heard the shower turn off, the sound snapping me back to reality. Quickly, I closed the laptop, making sure everything looked exactly as it had before. Then I went back to the couch and pretended to scroll on my phone. When Megan came out of the bathroom, she smiled at me like nothing was wrong. Like she wasn't leading a double life right under my nose. "How's your movie?" she asked, drying her hair with a towel. "It's good," I said, my voice steady even though my insides were churning. I don't know how I managed to play it cool, but I did. She climbed into bed a few minutes later, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The images from her laptop burned into my mind. There was no turning back now. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was betrayal, and I was going to make damn sure she paid for it. The morning after finding those emails, I woke up with a singular purpose. I needed more proof. Not just for myself, but for when the confrontation came. Megan was a master manipulator, and I wasn't going to give her any wiggle room to twist this around. At breakfast, Megan acted like everything was normal. She hummed while pouring coffee, joked about a meeting she had later that day, and kissed me on the cheek before heading out the door. It took everything in me not to push her against the wall and demand answers right then and there. But I held back. I needed a plan. After she left, I called my brother, Scott. He's my younger brother by 2 years, and we've always been close. The kind of close where you can tell each other anything, no matter how embarrassing or painful. When he picked up, his voice was groggy. "What's up, man? It's early." "I need your help," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "And it's serious." That woke him up. "What's going on?" I explained everything: the watch, the texts, the laptop. His silence on the other end of the line was unnerving, but when I finished, his response was immediate. "What a piece of shit," he said, his voice filled with quiet rage. "What do you need me to do?" I told him my plan. I was going to tell Megan I'd be out of town for the day on business. If she was truly cheating, she'd use the opportunity to bring her lover to the house. Meanwhile, I'd set up a camera to catch everything. Scott didn't hesitate. "I'm in. Come over to my place, and we'll watch the feed together. If anyone shows up, we'll go straight to your house." "Thanks, man," I said, my voice cracking. After hanging up, I spent the rest of the morning setting up the camera. I positioned it near the front door, hidden behind a plant, but angled perfectly to catch anyone entering or leaving. I tested it twice to make sure the footage would be clear. When Megan got home that evening, I played it cool. Over dinner, I casually mentioned a fake work trip. "I've got to head out early tomorrow," I said, stabbing a piece of chicken with my fork. "Won't be back until late." She barely looked up. "Work stuff?" "Yeah, some meetings with clients," I lied. Her reaction was subtle, but I caught it. A flicker of something in her eyes. Excitement? Relief? She covered it quickly, nodding and changing the subject to a new recipe she wanted to try. The next morning, I kissed her goodbye like always, grabbed my laptop bag, and left the house. Except instead of going to work, I drove straight to Scott's place. When I got there, he had coffee ready and his laptop set up to stream the camera feed. "You ready for this?" he asked, sliding a mug toward me. "No," I admitted, "but it's happening anyway." The two of us sat on his couch, watching the empty feet of my front door. My stomach churned with every passing minute. I told myself there was a chance nothing would happen, that maybe I was wrong. But then, just before noon, the door opened, and a man walked in. The second the stranger stepped into my house, my stomach dropped. I leaned closer to the laptop screen, my heart hammering so hard it felt like it might crack a rib. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed like someone who had just come from a gym. Sweatpants, sneakers, and a hoodie. He moved with an ease that made my blood boil, like he'd been in my house before. Scott, sitting next to me, let out a low whistle. "Who the hell is that?" "I don't know," I muttered, my jaw tightening. The man shut the door behind him and glanced around, as if making sure the coast was clear. Then, a few seconds later, Megan appeared on the screen. She greeted him with a hug. No, not a hug. She wrapped her arms around him, her body pressed against his like they hadn't seen each other in months. Then came the kiss. It wasn't a quick peck. It was passionate, hungry. "Jesus," Scott said under his breath. "What the hell, man?" I couldn't answer. My hands clenched into fists as I watched the scene unfold. Megan pulled him further into the house, out of the camera's view. I sat back, staring at the screen. My mind was racing. "They're in my house," I said, my voice low and shaking with fury. "In my fucking house." Scott stood up, pacing the room like he was trying to burn off his own anger. "What's the move, Eric? Are we going over there now?" I didn't respond immediately. I was torn between wanting to barge in and drag the guy out by his hoodie and wanting to wait to see just how far they'd go. But I knew myself. If I waited too long, the anger would boil over, and I'd do something I couldn't take back. "Let's go," I said finally. Standing up, Scott grabbed his keys without hesitation. "Let's do it." The drive to my house felt like it took forever. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly they ached. Scott sat in the passenger seat, silent but fuming. When we pulled up, I parked down the street so they wouldn't see us coming. My heart was pounding as Scott and I crept toward the house. I unlocked the door as quietly as I could, pushing it open just enough to hear voices. Megan's laugh carried through the hallway, light and carefree. It made me sick. Scott motioned for me to lead the way, and I stepped inside, moving toward the living room. My breathing was shallow, my fists clenched at my sides. When I turned the corner, there they were. The guy was sitting on my couch, his arms slung casually over Megan's shoulders. She was curled up next to him, laughing at something he'd said. Neither of them noticed me at first. Then Megan turned her head and froze. Her eyes widened, her mouth opening in shock. "Eric?" I didn't give her a chance to speak. "Get the fuck up," I growled, my voice low and dangerous. The guy jumped to his feet, looking between me and Megan like a deer caught in headlights. Megan stammered, "I can explain." "Don't even try," I snapped, cutting her off. Scott stepped into the room behind me, his presence adding an extra layer of menace. "Is this your boyfriend?" he asked, glaring at the stranger. The guy put his hands up, backing away. "Look, man, I didn't know." "Didn't know what?" I barked, stepping toward him. "Didn't know she was married? Didn't know this is my house?" Megan stood up, panic written all over her face. "Eric, please, let me explain." I turned on her, my voice icy. "Shut up, Megan. You've done enough." I pulled my phone out of my pocket and opened the gallery. "Remember these?" I said, holding up the screen to show the pictures I'd taken of her emails. "You think you could just lie to me, bring him into my house, and I wouldn't figure it out?" She looked like she wanted to disappear. Her lover, meanwhile, looked like he was debating whether to bolt out the door or stay and plead his case. "Scott," I said, not taking my eyes off the guy. "Grab her suitcase. She's not staying here another second." Scott didn't need me to tell him twice. He headed straight to the bedroom, muttering under his breath, and emerged a moment later with Megan's suitcase, tossing it into the living room with a loud thud. "Pack your shit," I said, my voice low but steady. Megan stood frozen, her face pale. "Eric, please, can we just talk about this? It's not what you think." "Not what I think," I snapped, my anger finally boiling over. "You've been sending naked pictures to this guy. Sneaking him into my house while I'm at work, and you're going to stand there and tell me it's not what I think? Her lover, still hovering awkwardly near the couch, tried to cut in. Look, man, maybe we should just shut the hell up. I barked, turning my fury on him. You don't get to say anything. Get the fuck out of my house before I drag you out myself. He hesitated for a moment, looking like he wanted to argue, but then Scott stepped forward. My brother isn't a small guy, and the look on his face made it clear he was ready to back me up. The guy held up his hands in surrender. All right, I'm leaving. He shot Megan a glance before heading for the door. Call me later, he muttered under his breath. That did it. Call him later? I yelled, taking a step toward him. You think this is some kind of joke? Scott grabbed my arm before I could get any closer. Not worth it, he said quietly, his grip firm. The guy slipped out the door, slamming it behind him. The room fell into a tense silence, broken only by the sound of Megan sobbing. I turned to her, my rage simmering just below the surface. Start packing, I said coldly. You're leaving. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. Eric, please. I made a mistake, but we can fix this. Don't throw everything away over one stupid fling. One stupid fling? I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. Megan, this isn't a mistake. This is who you are. A liar. A cheater. Someone who disrespects her husband and her marriage. And you think I'm just going to forgive you because you're crying? She tried to move closer to me, reaching out like she could somehow make it better. I love you, Eric. I swear. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I stepped back, shaking my head. You don't love me. If you did, you wouldn't have done this. Scott spoke up, his voice firm. Megan, you heard him. Pack your things and go. Her sobs grew louder, but she finally moved toward the suitcase. Watching her shove her clothes into it, still trying to plead her case between gasps, made my anger shift into something colder. This is your fault, Eric, she blurted suddenly, her tone sharp despite the tears. You've been so distant lately. Always working, never paying attention to me. What did you expect me to do? I stared at her, stunned by her audacity. Are you seriously trying to blame this on me? She zipped up the suitcase with a loud jerk. I'm not saying it's all your fault, but maybe if you'd been a better husband. Get out, I said, cutting her off. My voice was calm, but it carried a finality that even she couldn't argue with. Scott grabbed the suitcase and carried it to the door. Megan hesitated, her face crumpling as she realized she wasn't going to talk her way out of this. Eric, please, she whispered one last time, but I didn't say another word. She stepped out onto the porch, and Scott closed the door behind her. For a moment, the house was silent. Then Scott turned to me, his expression a mix of sympathy and pride. You did the right thing, man. She didn't deserve you. I nodded, but I didn't feel proud or relieved. I felt numb. She's gone, I said quietly, more to myself than to him. Now what? Scott clapped a hand on my shoulder. Now you move on. After Megan left, the house felt empty in a way I couldn't describe. It wasn't just her absence. It was the weight of everything she'd taken with her, the trust, the love, the sense of safety I'd built over 8 years. Scott stayed with me that night, knowing I wasn't ready to be alone. We sat on the couch with beers in hand, the TV playing some mindless show neither of us paid attention to. You going to be okay? He asked after a long silence. I took a sip of my beer, staring at the muted screen. I don't know, I admitted. I don't even know where to start. Scott leaned back, his expression thoughtful. Start with a lawyer. Make it official. Don't give her a chance to worm her way back into your life. He was right. Megan was manipulative, and if I gave her an inch, she'd try to take a mile. The next morning, I made the call. Meeting with my lawyer was sobering. Her name was Diana, and she didn't mince words. You're in a strong position, she said, scanning the photos and emails I'd provided. This evidence is clear-cut. If she tries to contest anything, we'll bury her. The word bury felt harsh, but it was exactly what I needed to hear. I wanted this over with, clean and fast. Megan wasn't going to play victim in court, not with everything I had on her. Just make sure you don't respond to her, Diana warned. No texts, No calls, nothing. If she contacts you, forward it to me. Got it, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Words spread fast in our social circle. Megan must have told someone her version of events because I started getting texts from mutual friends, some supportive, some nosy. Dude, I heard about Megan, one message read. What a mess. Let me know if you need anything. But not everyone was on my side. Are you sure you're not overreacting? Another text asked. People make mistakes. Maybe you two can work it out? I didn't bother responding. Anyone who thought I should forgive Megan didn't understand what she'd done, or how deep her betrayal had cut. It was Scott who suggested therapy. You've been through hell, he said one evening over dinner. You can't just bottle it up. At first, I resisted. Therapy felt unnecessary, like admitting I was weaker than I wanted to be. But after a few sleepless nights, I caved and booked a session. My therapist, Dr. Reynolds, was an older guy with a calm, steady presence. I poured out everything: the watch, the texts, the photos, the confrontation. She's a liar, I said, my voice shaking. I don't even know who she is anymore. Dr. Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. It's not uncommon to feel that way after a betrayal. What's important now is focusing on your healing. Megan's choices reflect on her, not on you. His words stuck with me. For so long, I'd blamed myself, wondering what I'd done wrong. But hearing someone else say it wasn't my fault gave me a glimmer of hope. By the time Megan tried to reach out, I was ready. Her texts were a mix of apologies and excuses. I'm so sorry, Eric. I never meant to hurt you. It was a mistake. Please, can we just talk? You're blowing this out of proportion. I forwarded every message to Diana, just as she'd instructed. When Megan showed up at the house a week later, I didn't even open the door. I stood behind the curtain, watching as she banged on the wood, her voice desperate. Eric, please, let me explain. But I didn't owe her anything, not after what she'd done. Eventually, she left, and I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time, I realized I didn't need her. A few weeks passed, and I started to feel like I was regaining control of my life. The divorce proceedings were underway. I was hitting the gym more often, and my focus at work had improved. Scott checked in regularly, and therapy was slowly helping me sort through the mess Megan had left behind. But, like clockwork, Megan couldn't resist one last attempt to pull me back into her orbit. It was a Saturday morning when she showed up unannounced, knocking at the door like she hadn't blown my world apart. I considered ignoring her, but something told me this was different. I opened the door to find her standing there, makeup smeared from crying, clutching a stack of papers in her hands. Eric, please, she said, her voice trembling. I just need you to listen. I crossed my arms, blocking the doorway. What do you want, Megan? She held out the papers. I wrote you a letter. Well, a few letters. I need you to understand why this happened. I didn't take them. Why? So you can justify cheating? Bringing another man into my house? Humiliating me in front of our friends? Her face crumpled, but I didn't care. It wasn't like that, she whispered. I was lonely. You were always so busy, and I felt like I didn't matter anymore. The sheer audacity of her words made me laugh. Cold, bitter laughter. So your solution was to screw someone else? That's rich, Megan. I made a mistake, she said, her voice rising in desperation. I know I hurt you, but we've been together for 8 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you? I stepped closer, lowering my voice. It meant something to me, Megan, but it clearly didn't mean shit to you. Now get off my porch. She stared at me, tears spilling down her cheeks. Eric. Leave, I said, my voice firm, or I'll call the cops. For a moment, I thought she'd fight me on it. But then she turned and walked away, her shoulders slumped. I shut the door and leaned against it, feeling a strange mix of anger and relief. That was the last time I saw Megan in person. Over the next few months, I threw myself into rebuilding my life. I sold the house. It was too full of memories to ever feel like mine again, and moved into a small but cozy apartment across town. My career flourished in ways I hadn't expected. Without Megan draining my energy and focus, I finally had the bandwidth to take on new projects and push for a promotion. I also reconnected with old friends, people Megan had subtly pushed out of my life over the years. They welcomed me back without hesitation, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a support system outside of my brother. While I was rebuilding, Megan's life seemed to crumble. Word of her affair spread quickly, and she became a pariah among our mutual friends. The guy she cheated with? He ghosted her not long after the confrontation. Olivia, one of Megan's closest friends, reached out to me one day. "I heard about everything," she said, her tone a mix of disgust and pity. "I can't believe she did that to you. She's been trying to spin the story, but no one's buying it." Hearing that was bittersweet. I didn't take pleasure in Megan's suffering, but I couldn't deny the satisfaction of knowing she couldn't escape the consequences of her actions. The divorce was finalized 6 months to the day after Megan left. It was quick and clean, thanks to the mountain of evidence I'd collected. She didn't get a dime more than she was legally entitled to, and I walked away with my dignity intact. That evening, Scott came over with a bottle of whiskey to celebrate. "To fresh starts," he said, raising his glass. "To never falling for a liar again," I replied, clinking my glass against his. For the first time in a long time, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. After the divorce was finalized, I felt like I could finally breathe. The chaos of the last few months was behind me, and the future stretched out ahead, uncertain but mine to shape. I focused on the small victories at first. My new apartment was starting to feel like home, with furniture I picked out and walls that didn't echo with memories of Megan. I joined a local hiking group, rediscovering a passion I'd let fall to the wayside during my marriage. Work continued to improve as well. My boss took notice of my renewed drive, and I was promoted to a management position. It wasn't just the salary bump. It was the sense of accomplishment, the reminder that I was capable of thriving on my own. Every so often, news of Megan's life would trickle back to me through mutual friends or social media. "She's still living with her sister," Olivia told me during a coffee catch-up. "I think she's trying to start over, but she's burned a lot of bridges." I nodded, not feeling much of anything at the mention of her name. At one point, it would have sent me spiraling, but now? She was just another chapter in my story, one I had no interest in rereading. One day, I happened to pass her in a grocery store. She didn't see me, and I didn't go out of my way to make myself known. She looked tired, older somehow. The sight of her didn't spark anger or sadness, just a quiet sense of distance. Scott remained my rock throughout it all, but I also found support in unexpected places. The hiking group introduced me to people who didn't know me as the guy whose wife cheated, and that was refreshing. One person in particular stood out, a woman named Tessa. She was confident, funny, and had this way of making everyone feel at ease. We started talking during one of the hikes, and before I knew it, we were grabbing coffee after the trails. It wasn't a romance, at least not yet, but it felt good to have someone to talk to who wasn't tied to the mess of my past. Therapy played a huge role in helping me process everything. Dr. Reynolds pushed me to think about my own patterns, how I'd ignored red flags, how I'd let Megan manipulate me for so long. "It's not about blaming yourself," he said during one session. "It's about understanding your part so you don't end up in the same situation again." He was right. As much as Megan had betrayed me, I couldn't ignore the times I'd chosen to look the other way, convincing myself things were fine when they clearly weren't. One night, as I sat on my balcony sipping a beer, I thought about something that hadn't crossed my mind in months: kids. Megan and I had talked about having children one day, but it was always vague, more of a someday topic than a plan. Now, I realized how grateful I was that we never went through with it. Bringing children into a marriage built on lies would have been devastating, for them and for me. It wasn't a loss, I decided. It was a blessing in disguise. A year after the confrontation, I found myself at peace with what had happened. Megan's betrayal had hurt, but it had also forced me to confront truths about myself and my life that I'd been avoiding. I wasn't the same person I'd been when we first met, and that was a good thing. I was stronger now, more aware of my worth. The world hadn't ended when Megan walked out of my life. In fact, it had opened up in ways I never expected. 1 year and 2 months after Megan walked out of my life for good, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, watching the city lights twinkle below. The air was crisp, carrying the faint hum of distant traffic and the occasional laughter from the street. It felt peaceful. It had taken time, longer than I expected, but I'd finally arrived at a place where the anger, betrayal, and regret didn't weigh me down anymore. Megan tried reaching out one last time a few weeks after the divorce was finalized. She sent an email, a long, rambling message about how much she missed me, how she realized she'd made a mistake, how she hoped we could find our way back to each other someday. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the email to Diana for my records, then archived it. That chapter was closed, and no amount of Megan's guilt or regret was going to reopen it. Work continued to thrive. I landed a major client that set me up for a promotion I never thought I'd reach so soon. The confidence I'd lost during my marriage, constantly second-guessing myself under Megan's manipulative gaze, was back, stronger than ever. My colleagues noticed, too. "You've been on fire lately," one of them said during a meeting. "What's your secret?" I smiled, thinking about how much lighter life felt without carrying Megan's lies. "Just keeping my focus," I said. Tessa and I had grown closer. What started as casual post-hike coffee turned into dinners, late-night phone calls, and shared weekends exploring new trails. She was nothing like Megan, honest, direct, and kind in ways I hadn't realized I needed. One evening, as we sat on her porch watching the sunset, she asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Do you think you'll ever fully forgive her?" "Megan, I mean," I thought about it for a moment. "I don't think it's about forgiveness," I said finally. "It's about letting go. She doesn't have power over me anymore. That's all I need." Tessa nodded, her hand brushing mine. "That's a good answer." Looking back, I realized how much I'd learned from the experience. Not just about relationships, but about myself, what I wanted, what I deserved, and what I wouldn't tolerate ever again. I wouldn't ignore red flags. I wouldn't let someone manipulate me into doubting my instincts. And I'd never settle for a relationship that left me feeling less than whole. While I'd once been relieved Megan and I never had kids, I'd also started to think about the future. With the right person, someone honest and committed, I could see myself building the family I'd once dreamed of. For now, though, I was content. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that betrayal doesn't have to define you. It hurts, it cuts deep, but it doesn't have to be the end of your story. You're stronger than you think. You can rebuild. And sometimes, losing the wrong person is the best thing that could ever happen to you. As I stood on that balcony, sipping a beer and watching the city come alive below me, I felt a quiet sense of gratitude. Megan's betrayal had broken me, but it had also forced me to grow in ways I never thought possible. Life was good, better, even. And for the first time in years, I was exactly where I was meant to be. Subscribe so you don't miss new stories on the channel.